Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we face. I'm Matt Orsagh, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Maisaradze, founder and CEO at ED4S.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nawar Alsaadi, CEO and founder of Kanata Advisors and Senior Advisor to ED4S.
Today, we're going to do something a little special. We're going to be our own guests. We're going to talk about the recent paper we published at ED4S, Operational Sustainability, 8 Role Sheets in Finance. What we want to get to with this paper is, what does sustainability look like in practice? How do you operationalize sustainability for different roles? So let's get right into things. The reasoning behind why we did this paper, why we thought it was important for financial institutions to integrate ESG into traditional roles, and how to do that. Maria, you want to get us started?
Yeah, and I think it's part of the journey that we've been on. So when we started at ED4S 2020, the market was really not mature. So most of the focus was around onboarding people to sustainability. And this is where we worked with financial institutions to create a common language and understanding of what is sustainability, what is ESG, what it is not, and what does it mean for financial sector, talking about risks and opportunities, the investor demand, etc. So now 4 years later, as we've been integrating this onboarding systems and trainings across organizations, we are seeing the maturity come through, where now different divisions within those organizations are asking themselves, okay, our people now get the terminology, they get why, but more specifically, what can they do to really embed this within their roles? And then I think we also need to be aware that, unfortunately, yet now still in North America, organizations are not as mature. Obviously, there's no regulation, but the whole radical sustainability is still not here across most of the traditional financial institutions. And so given those different, I would say, blockages potentially and slowdowns that the politicization in the US could bring, we're thinking, what can we do to actually empower individuals within the workforce across different departments to start doing something within their role, within their control? We're not talking about taking on additional volunteering job. Everybody here is trying to balance their work-life balance. They have their 40-hour work weeks. And so what can they do that seamlessly integrates within what they already do on day-to-day, within whatever is already there within the role objectives, but allows them to shine, allow them to lead their department and maybe even progress in their careers by embedding this best practices and sustainability leadership workflows. So that was the idea behind, and then we initially identified 10 roles and then scaled down to 8. It was a really interesting practice, but personally for me, I was lucky enough to have experienced some of those roles directly and indirectly. So having that really on the ground understanding what the role entails, I think was a great starting point to understand what we need to achieve and how do we bring it to the people. They're too busy to read 60-page reports, so we did it in a 4-pager per role format. And hopefully it's going to drive some workflow changes.
Yeah, there's 60 pages total if people want to read everything. But you're right. I think the great part of this paper, I wish it was something that existed, 5-10 years ago, or even longer, when I'll date myself and tell how old I am. But when I started doing this ESG world, something like this would have been great, because people want to know how. How do I do this? How do I do this as a portfolio manager, as an analyst? And we'll get into, the roles we chose and some of the results we found. But I think that's going to be immensely helpful to people, because they're asking, they know a lot more now about the basics of sustainability and ESG, and some of them even have certificates, whether it's from SASB or CFA or GARP or the number of certificates around climate change or sustainability out there. But they don't really know how to apply that to their position. And I hope this is helpful for them in doing that.
Well, Matt, you mentioned that, 5-10 years ago, there was no such paper. Today, still there is no such paper. This is the only paper I've seen that tackles ESG from the perspective of the daily workflow of different financial professionals. We have a plethora of guides and papers and blogs and webinars that talks about broadly about ESG and ESG integration and sustainability in business. But I've never seen somebody attempt what we've attempted to do with this paper. It's take these concepts and link them to the day-to-day in a way that is accessible to the reader, and in a way demystify what we mean by ESG integration. So I'm very excited that we get to put this together, and I think people who read the paper will see how differentiated it is from everything else they've read in this space.
Yeah, I just want to mention I have seen attempts. So when we started this and started talking to different stakeholders, some of them referred to some interesting sources. And I think one of the most prominent is around kind of climate jobs. So integrating climate into different roles. And I did consult those. However, as I was reading them, having worked in financial sector, it was clear to me that it was not written by somebody from finance background. And so this person doesn't really understand the mechanics and how this world works, which I think is really crucial. And then again, there's other initiatives that are trying to train people on integrating climate or sustainability within their roles. But again, it feels like it's done as a side project rather than real embedding within the role functions. So yeah, I think we did step towards a new era, and I think we're going to get challenged. I think some of the people that are reading it will say it's not ambitious enough. That's where we can maybe dive a little bit into the challenges. But at least it's just creating this conversation and hopefully awakening people to the reality that they can actually do something within their roles. They're not ESG roles, but every other day roles.
Yeah, and before we're going to jump into the roles in a second, but before we do that, a little bit about the methodology. How we did this is, we picked, as Maria said, we started off with 10 roles we think of, and then we narrowed that down to 8 that we thought were the most pertinent, and we put together our efforts of what we thought, because we're financial folks, but of course we don't know everything. So we reached out to people in each role and shared what we had done with them to see, does this ring true? Is this your experience as an analyst, as a portfolio manager, as a risk manager, and so on. And we thank some of those people at the back of the paper, and we'll thank you them again here. But so we hope that helped kind of get us even a little closer to the truth of each role. So now let's jump into a little bit about the key roles we looked at and what we learned from what we found. Who wants to go first?
I can give it a try. I think what we learned is there are a lot of similarities between the roles, and there are some clear differences. And I believe that was, if we want to touch on the challenges I think we've had as we were putting that methodology together, is sometimes it's hard to draw certain boundaries between roles. We had to take, I would call it an arbitrary decision. We had to draw a line, and I think the consultations that we've had have helped with that. But in terms of what we learned and what I learned as I went through this, is that it's the differences are not major. And there are certain roles that require perhaps more soft skills, and other roles require more deeper quantitative skills. But it's I would say the center of gravity of where ESG comes into a given role tend to be distributed across the workflow. So if you really understand the workflow of what a supply manager does, what a portfolio manager does, what an investment analyst does, you see that ESG is not done in one piece. It's done across the board. And whether it's soft or quantitative, this cannot be tackled just at one step. Now, we can go into other aspects, cultural, whether you're empowered to do that or not, whether culturally the institution embraces you doing these things or not. We can talk about this later. But anyways, that's what my 2 cents on what kind of really stood out to me from going through this paper.
Yeah, let me just jump into actually mention which roles we covered, because in case of listeners didn't listen to the white paper, what we covered...
We've held them in suspense this long.
Yeah, well, it's 8 roles, and I can actually mention also which ones we cut off and the reason why, because they are still really important roles, but they were pretty tricky, and we decided to maybe leave them for later. So we talked about commercial lending representatives, and this was a decision because we do have several bank clients that are really trying to fast track the training and of their commercial lending reps. And that totally makes sense with the net zero targets. Obviously, they all want to finance some transition projects, which look good. So that was one of them. Communication specialist. So that's more of a marketing function. I'd say it's a little bit further from what we core do, but I would say as communications, as other roles we covered, like when things comes back a lot, one theme comes back a lot is the regulation, right? So you don't want to get in trouble. Then in terms of the financial roles, we covered financial advisor. So the people who give advice on investments, investment analyst, and portfolio manager. So those are within the same realm of the investment universe. We also covered the procurement specialist, risk manager, and a software developer, which is also a bit different, but we're still lucky to have some software developers give the input on this one. The two roles we did set aside for now is an HR representative and an accounting person. Those roles are crucial, so important, but they do deserve, I think, a more extensive research. And the challenge also with those roles is that within HR, you're going to have people that are in charge of incentive systems, the employee well-being, the recruitment. And so it's becoming a multi-role function rather than just HR. And the same thing for accounting. You have people reporting in reporting space, you have others in reconciliation, etc. And so that's where we thought it will get pretty complex and pretty hard very fast. And we decided to put that aside. But however, if we have listeners here who would like to collaborate on white paper unpacking those two roles, we're certainly happy to do that in the coming months.
That's a great transition to the next thing we want to talk about is, the challenges of embedding ESG into these workflows for different roles. And I can start off with this one. I mean, just one of the main challenges is that, most of these roles are so different. Analyst and portfolio manager were pretty similar. It's interesting. Those are the first two I started working on, and they're a lot of the skills you need and the resources you need to know about and the interactions with other people on the team are very similar. And then I started looking at communication specialist and software developer. I'm like, whoa, these are totally different worlds from what we had before. And so that's part of the challenge, but also hopefully part of the benefit of this exercise is that you're going to have to know different skills, and you're going to have to use. There's the, and we'll go into this later. We recommend kind of the resources, some of the resources people might use, some of the skills they might need for each role, and that's just going to be wildly different when you're looking at 8 different roles, and that's why, of course, they're separated and differentiated. But I think that was one of the main challenges: is to have something where we're covering enough to give people a good start into what they're doing, whether they're a software developer or an analyst, but not overwhelming them with, we could write 20, 30 pages on each of these if we wish to, but I think that would have been diminishing returns after a little bit. So synthesizing everything into a good short, bite-sized 4 or 5 page analysis of where people should start, I think was the main challenge from my perspective. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think digestibility was one of our criteria, given the amount of amazing research that's out there. And we will be publishing just the role sheets in the coming weeks. But in terms of challenges, so on my side, when I was looking at the different roles, I think it's really finding that common ground, because depending on organization, and Nawar mentioned this earlier, some people will have more responsibility, some will have less. Example, procurement. In some organizations, the procurement department is 10, 20 people, and they're all in charge of different industry procurement, or they have different roles and levels. And so how do you find that one typical role and kind of focus on that, right? To still be relevant to majority. And that was one of the challenges. Same thing goes to commercial lending. Often enough, they do also collaborate with other departments, the compliance department, the risk department, etc. And so at one point we're like, well, the commercial lending representative can identify potential risk factors and improve his credit analysis. But then we had to go back and say, well, that's not the job of commercial lending representatives to identify new risks. His job is to sell more loans. And so that's where this collaboration with the other department comes in. So like tracing those lines was quite challenging, but I think we had to do those hard calls sometimes to actually get to some movement in our thinking on this. What do you think, Nawar? What was the challenge?
Well, I think that the challenge and something we can't cover in this paper is if somebody was to follow all these steps, will they truly be embedding ESG? Yes, technically yes, but it's a bit like ticking the box exercise. This cannot become a ticking the box exercise. I mean, the goal here is not to give a mechanical way for somebody to do their job. I think the challenge with any guide of this nature is you look at it and you say, okay, well, here I'm an investment analyst. I looked at the ESG risks. Now I'm evaluating ESG risks. But there's a part of you that you have to apply to this process. There is a judgment call to be made. There's a level of motivation that papers like this can't bring into the environment, the work environment. And I think you touched a little bit, Maria, on this in terms of the connection between the roles, the connectors. These roles ultimately have to be able to speak to each other. They have to plug into each other. And for this to properly work, everybody in the chain also have to be doing their part. So if you are a commercial lending representative and selling sustainability-linked bonds, you have to also have a level of confidence that the chain of custody around sustainability and ESG is respected by your colleagues. So these roles, I mean, if you by yourself doing these things in isolation of others, some of these activities might be hard to achieve. And just to maybe give a concrete example, let's say you really die hard and you really want to go and follow these steps and include this ESG fully in your work process. There are resources that your institution has to pay for. They have to pay for subscriptions. They have to get additional data sets. Some of these things are expensive. What do you do if you don't have access to these tools? We don't have an answer for that, and we it's not the purpose of this paper to find an answer to every challenge. But these are the things that I think about that I think are challenging to address in a paper of this nature.
Like it just said too, that's a great point, and I think this is going to be a great resource for individuals, but also the leadership of the firm has to, and we've talked about this probably on every podcast, is, it has to be embedded into the culture of the firm as well. Just handing someone this paper and say, do this, isn't going to get it done. I think we've structured it so it's beyond box ticking. We tell people about the skills, they need to have and some of the resources that could be helpful and what a workflow looks like. And that's something you have to do. You can't tick off a box of the workflow for the day. It's part of your job, is what you do. But ultimately, it has to be embodied by the firm itself, and leadership has to see, okay, does communication know what the analysts are doing? Do they know their role? And that's getting into the next thing we wanted to talk about is an example of pick an example from this list and that you want to highlight, and kind of walk through how you think that works and helps folks in their position. I'm happy to go, but does someone else want to go first? Sure. What I want to talk about was, and I'll walk through kind of the different sections of the role. Of course, we want you to read this yourself, but I'll start with a communication specialist. We talk about the role overview first. What is that role? Then we talk about skills that role may need, and those may be new skills for folks. Then we talk about some of the standards and resources they need to be familiar with. And then we give a couple practical applications or case studies for each. And they're going to be the case studies we give a different one or two for each role. So I recommend people read through all of them. And then we talk about what does the workflow look like for that role. And for the communication specialist, I picked that to talk about because, again, I'm very old. I've been in this financial ESG world for a long time. And I see that that's the part of this equation that has only started to come up to speed in a lot of cases because people didn't think it was necessary. ESG came around and sustainability came around. It's like, oh, there's new data sets we need to know. Okay, our analysts will do it, or our portfolio managers will do it. Or in most places, it was one or two very specialized sustainability people. and they would do it, and they would go talk to the portfolio managers, or they would go talk to the analysts. And so there wasn't really that knowledge of the topic of sustainability throughout the firm, and not even the team, the financial team. And that slowly grew through education and through different programs. And so financial professionals knew more about it, portfolio managers knew more about it. But then they would hand things over to a marketing team, or they'd work with a marketing team, and no fault to the marketing team, but they weren't trained on these things for the most part. The communications team weren't trained on these things. And I remember just, talking to people through the years that was a frustration and a pain point in a lot of firms, in a lot of places. And that's really a risk, because you can get into greenwashing problems if the communication team doesn't know what they don't know and what they need to be talking about. And you can get into a case where we are now, where everyone understands that sustainability and ESG is a hot trend, and you want to seem as green as you can, but you don't want a communications team going out there and say, yeah, we're green. We're really green. We're the best. Because that's, that can be a greenwashing problem. So I think this communications one is the one I wanted to see the most, because I think it's one that's needed the most, because communications folks and marketing folks want this information. They want to be trained on this. And to date, for the most part, there hasn't been a lot of resources to train them. And I'll stop there and hand it off.
And that's actually a great pick, Matt. That communications one was not obvious to do. And I really appreciate that we had some marketing consultants, sustainability consultants weigh on this one, because our team is not expert in marketing. But one thing that we identified for communications, right? It was like the understanding about the greenwashing, but also the greenhushing and all the other variations of it. And I think, interestingly enough, that the importance of closely working with the compliance team, because when it comes to communications and greenwashing, it all comes down to what is the perception of the market, of the people. And this could be very different. Terminology could be different between Europe and the US and Asia and Latin America, etc. And so you really need to be tuned into what does the society or your audience is, how are they interpreting this? Word impact could mean so many things. So yeah, that's a really good pick, because I think there's a lot of work to be done on communication side. I'll go next. I'll pick on a commercial lending, and I'll just focus on one specific section of the role sheet, which we identified was the business case of integrating ESG into this role, which I think it's always a topic of the mind. Like, why would I change? I'm not getting paid extra. I need to do my sales. Why do I waste? And that's how some people think about it. Time learning about green transition, hydrogen, nuclear, etc. So I just want to highlight the business case for that role for commercial lending. The way I see it is that the regulation is coming, the carbon tax is increasing, the client pressure is coming. Everybody's now starting to measure and reduce their Scope 3 emissions. And so in that context, when you are managing a portfolio of commercial clients, you do have a reason to go and call up your client that you maybe haven't talked to for a couple of years and say, hey, have you heard about this subsidy? And by the way, we have a loan that can go with it. And this will allow you to, over maybe 5 to 10 years, reduce your energy costs or transport costs or whatever it is. And so you're actually coming in, talking to your client in an intelligent way. And we're not talking about saving the world here. We're talking about good business, efficiency, better positioning in front of your client. So that's a section probably my favored for me is what is the business case for this? Because our audience for this white paper was not necessarily people who want to dedicate their life and profession to sustainability or making the world a better place, but rather want to take advantage of opportunities that are out there.
I can jump in my favorite role, which is the portfolio manager role, because I did that role and I could really relate to that part of the paper. But I think to really show our listeners how carefully we thought about this, if you look at the portfolio manager role and the investment analyst role, there are a lot of parallels between them. But there's, for example, a skill that a portfolio manager needs to have that investment analyst doesn't necessarily need to have. And if you look at the list of skills, you see one of them for portfolio managers is systems level thinking. They have to understand the interplay between the different constituents in their portfolio. An investment analyst is looking at a narrow maybe set of equities or a sector. They have a very deep understanding and a fundamental understanding of what's happening in that area of focus and expertise for them. But a portfolio manager have to understand the interplay between all these companies. And specifically when it comes to sustainability, you have to have that understanding because these are not isolated impacts, whether environmental or social, and they could also bleed into the financial. So I think the way we structure this by giving first a general description of what the role is, going into the skills, which is a critical piece of every role, the skills you need to have. And then we provide the reader a list of resources and then apply them in an example and kind of mini case studies, and then finally have a workflow around how all that connects together. I think that was a great approach that did allow us to tackle all these roles and in a unified way. But at the same time, they have all their unique characteristics, but there's a common thread of how we are tackling them. So I think everyone that worked on this paper did a good job by finally zooming in that way of addressing this question.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about one final thing here, but I would invite people to read the paper to get back to us on, roles that we think that we may have missed or things we may have missed or ways to improve this, because we're gonna, this is our bread and butter. This is what we talk about: how to train people to better understand how to integrate sustainability into the investment process and into the financial process. So please, we invite people to read and get back with us. But we're going to try and anticipate that a little. And the last thing we want to talk about is the future of, ESG integration in financial institutions. What does that look like? If we redo this paper in 5 years, what does that look like? Where do we see things going? Just to go back 5 years, we talked about this a little earlier, we wouldn't have had these roles considered, for some of these detailed breakdowns of what that role does. Like I said, with the communications team, marketing team, they largely wouldn't have been considered in this conversation 5 years ago. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now in the future, how do you see this evolving? Maria, I'll put you on the spot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can go first. And I haven't thought about it in advance, actually. But the way I see it is, first of all, amplification. So what we've kind of touched on, but at a much of a deeper level. But also one factor that we took into consideration when we're writing this paper is that most of the financial institutions, depending where, obviously, but a lot of financial institutions still do not have sustainable products, whether it's investment products, whether it's lending products. The regulation is still evolving, the reporting is still evolving, there's still lack of standardization. The litigation is clearly ramping up. So if I kind of project all of that work that's currently in progress to 5 years from now, everybody will know what's a green bond. Everybody will know what is a sustainability-linked loan. Everybody will understand the investment strategies, which are integrating different ESG approaches. So I could see it within the current system evolve in that way, unless we have a very radical change to how the financial system looks like. And then also on the technology side, we didn't touch on the software developer piece, but I've been thinking a lot about the role of software developers and IT teams into all of this, beyond just providing the data sets for ESG for reporting purposes. Financial institutions are connectors, and they don't really have a real world impact other than connecting different players in the market. And so if they are able to identify opportunities to create circular economy, to create economies of sharing resources between their clients, between their investors, I feel that is an opportunity that could unfold. But I feel the technology teams would have to play a big role in innovating in that space, as well as the product design teams, as well as the risk teams. But that would be a really great place for financial institutions to evolve, to understand that they're not just transactional and just a source of capital, but they actually can create synergies and create value collectively to their clients by looking at things systemically.
Well, I mean, my hope in 5 to 10 years is this paper would look redundant, and there is no need to write papers like that because people understand that they have to do a lot of what we talk about today and the paper as a matter of course in the way they run their business, because the regulation is there, the culture is there, the data is there. If you guys remember, we did this podcast earlier in the year on the IBM paper Beyond Ticking the Box, and there was a prediction of how far sustainability will be embedded in different roles by 2026, and it was triple-digit growth expectations by executives in that survey across the spectrum of roles. So I'm hopeful that we are in a very small measure contributing to that understanding and that integration. But you touched, by the way, something I want to explore a little bit, maybe before handing to you, Matt, to talk about the future as well, is software. Actually, one thing we did that we maybe did not intend to do, but we actually ended up doing, is we build a blueprint for ESG solution companies to understand the workflows, to build software that allow people who want to integrate ESG in their day-to-day life achieve that. Because a lot of software developers and technology companies don't have such a deep understanding of how these roles operate and what these individuals have to do. And actually our paper does that. And I'm saying it here on the podcast, if you are going to build a solution and sell it, we claim royalties if you used our paper. but that's to be, this is how we're enabling impact beyond what we think we're potentially enabling with a paper like that. But I'll pass it to you, Matt. I don't know if you have a take on where the future will take us.
Well, I actually had an answer I thought of before we started this conversation, but then something you said, Nawar, made me think of something else that I think is a better answer. So I'm going to go with that one. You were talking about systems thinking from a portfolio manager. And I think that's something that's really new to a lot of people, especially in the financial world. And I think that's going to become more prevalent throughout all of these roles. And it gets into first, the system of the company itself, the financial firm itself. The marketing team needs to know what the portfolio manager does and doesn't know and understand in their role and all of these roles we talk about. But on a broader level, it's, interacting systems in the world we live in and how they interact with each other. If you're a portfolio manager, that's key. But I think if you're a marketer, if you're a software developer, if you're any of these roles, you need to go beyond the silo or the tunnel vision of just your role and understand what impact that has, your role in the outside world on you. There's a great book by Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems, that came out in 2008, I think, that I recommend to people. Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems is the book again. And it gets into that. It gets into trying to think in these system ways to better understand how does what I'm doing impact the world and the world impact what I'm doing. And this thing over here, A impacts B, impacts C, as much as you can. It can get overwhelming a bit, but I think that's more of what we're going to see in these financial roles in the future is less siloed focus and more systems level thinking to try and understand how each role impacts the others and the world outside and how the firm, reacts, the impact the firm has on the outside world and the outside world has on the firm and all the other systems we need to think about.
Yeah, in that context, I also wanted to recommend a book, actually, more specifically for the financial sector. One of my favorite books, 21st Century Investing, Redirecting Financial Strategies to Drive Systems Change. That's a little plug for William Buckhart and Steve Leidenberg. I thought that book was really an eye-opener, which takes from traditional, sustainable investing, ESG integration, impact investing, all the way to systems level investing. And I love the point that John Lukomnik recently said is that when you look at a portfolio, almost 90% of it is really just a performance of the market, and maybe 10 or so percent is just your alpha. And so as portfolio managers and analysts just focus on that alpha, nobody's taking care of the beta, right? And so that 90% of portfolio returns is what is at risk right now. And there are financial institutions that are doing their part. And so that's why the book is great, because they have really specific examples of real-world financial institutions, such as CalPERS, CDPQ, etc., that are putting in place investment strategies, engagement strategies that are driving this change. So highly recommend the book. We're not getting any commission on this, but I think we'll drive the whole financial sector forward if we were to be awoken to all of these concepts.
Yeah, and Steve and Bill are at TIP, the Investment Integration Project, that their whole thing is systems level investing, systems level thinking. And both those books, I read them both. They're both great. I would recommend them as well. Nawar, you had something to add?
Yes, I do have something to add. I'd like specifically to thank the contributors that helped us with the paper, because I don't think we could have done it without, and I'm going to read their first names: Alexander, Anna, Carlos, Kondrut, David, Hardik, John, Kevita, Martin, Sebastien, Soleil, Taufik, Valerie, and the others who chose to be anonymous. Without their feedback, this paper could not have happened. So we're very, very grateful for their contribution. You can see their names on page 57. And that's the way sustainability works. It's never a single entity or single organization. It's always a group effort. And I think this paper embodied that.
That's great. I wholeheartedly agree. We have thanked them individually, and if you know them, please thank them yourself. If you want to get in touch with them, go ahead and bother them. Yeah, we did, and they wanted to talk about this, so we think they'd be okay with it. If you want to talk to us and bother us, we're available on LinkedIn or through ed4s.org. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.